Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Bockel. I'm the Communications Director for NJ11 for Change. Welcome to today's Defending Democracy presentation. Today, we're all about the vote-by-mail system, how it helps voters, how the process works, and all the security measures that are in place to make sure that your vote is secure and your vote is counted. We're here today with Chris Durkin, the County Clerk for Essex County, New Jersey. He's been the clerk here since 2006, and it's the largest county in the state with over 532,000 registered voters, so it's not an easy job. Chris knows the election process inside out and has always made it his mission to make sure people have the information they need to exercise their right to vote. The people of Essex County are lucky to have him, and we're very lucky to have him here with us tonight to answer questions about vote by mail. As we talk, if you have questions for him, you can type them into the comments section on YouTube, and we'll try to get to them if we have time. So Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Good evening. I would like to thank the administrators of 11th for Change, Mara Novak and Judy Kelly, and Communications Director Leslie Bockel for the invitation and the ability to reach such a large and diverse group of citizens who are passionate about democracy. There is no greater bond than the bond created by shared sacrifice, and everyone is sacrificing at this time in our nation's history. I'm an optimist by nature, And I know that we will emerge from this tragedy as a stronger, smarter, and more empathetic community. Voting by mail has been a means in which to vote since the Civil War. It was utilized mostly by the military. Vote by mail has a history of being restrictive in America, but has expanded greatly in the last 20 years. In 2009, New Jersey was a state that had only absentee voting. So you needed to check off an excuse why you wanted an absentee ballot. You know, that could be you were in the military, the nature and hours of your work, you were disabled, but you had to list an excuse as to why you wanted to vote by mail, which New York still has to this day. But in 2009, New Jersey went to vote by mail, no excuse voting. They made vote by mail equal to voting at the polls. There are 5 states in America that do all vote by mail elections. They are Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington State, and Utah. So we only have about 12 to 14% of people vote by mail. And I think that's because it's pretty easy to vote in person in New Jersey because there's so many polling places that allow for no lines really in voting, no real wait, as opposed to other states that have regionalized their polling places where there might be 20,000 or more voters in a polling location where there's going to be lines and it forces them to vote by mail. So New Jersey's kind of, resisted the vote by mail push, but we have increased, our legislature and our governor has increased the vote by mail file because in 2018, the legislature passed a law that said anyone who voted in the 2016 presidential election by mail was automatically going to be put on the forever vote by mail file. And then they actually came back, the legislature, a year later and said, you know what, we forgot the people in 2017 and the people in 2018, and we want to make them forever vote by mail voters unless they request otherwise in writing. So they would have to request in writing to come off that file. As of today, we have 40,000 vote by mail voters in a regular election that would be mailed a ballot. You go back just 5 years ago, and that number was 8,000. So from 8,000 to 40,000 is quite a jump.
Is that in Essex County specifically, Chris?
Yes, that's specifically in Essex County. And I know, Leslie, you talked about the process throughout the state, and the process throughout the state mirrors each other in counties on how the vote by mail process works. So we're governed by state statute. All the materials are the same as far as wording, and the process is the same along the way.
Great. So the detail that you'll give us today, they apply not just to Essex County, but to the other counties in the 11th district.
That's correct. Yeah,
great.
that's correct.
Great.
It's universal.
Perfect.
So that gets us to Executive Order 105. Executive Order 105 was signed by Governor Phil Murphy, and it made the May 12th election, which includes school board elections and May nonpartisan elections, for the first time ever in New Jersey, we have an all vote by mail election. And it includes 6 municipalities in Essex County. It is Belleville, Irvington, Montclair, Nutley, Newark, and Orange. So pretty big voting block of 296,000 voters. And everyone has been mailed a ballot to vote on. If you do not receive a ballot, or if you haven't received your ballot, you can go to essexclerk.com and request a second ballot. There is a second ballot request form on the website that allows you to email that request form to us so that we can priority mail you a ballot. Here's the ballot right here that I have, and I'm going to open it and just show you the step-by-step process. So this is the carrier envelope, which includes the voter's name and address. You open it up and we have a ballot, and this ballot is the Montclair ballot. The Montclair ballot, you would have one choice for mayor, two choices for at-large council, and one choice for ward council. And the one big difference between voting at the voting machine and voting by mail is that the voting machine does not allow you to overvote. And overvote means you're selecting more choices than you're allowed, which nullifies your vote. So if you have two choices for at-large council and you vote for 3 people, that vote is nullified. But in the polling, in the voting machine, it locks. It doesn't allow you to vote for more than you're allowed to vote for. You don't have to vote for all of your choices. If you have 2 choices, you can vote for 1. So you would vote your ballot. You fill in the oval with black pen or black pencil. You cannot use red. You want to avoid using red pen. We have a certification envelope where the ballot is going to go inside of. We have a notice to the voters that explains why this is happening, about the executive order, also explains about how disabled voters can vote. Disabled voters are told to go to our website to look at the process or to be read the process. They can call our phone number. Disabled voters can vote in 2 ways. They can vote by email, and they can vote in person on election day at the Hall of Records. If you're visually impaired, there's an audio cassette that reads the ballot to you. So there was an article today about email voting. The state said that we need to have email voting available just for disabled voters. So it's only for disabled voters. The complication with email voting is your privacy is taken away when you vote by email, because you have to sign a waiver that you're giving your privacy away, because when the email comes back, it is your name attached to the voted ballot. And then we have our return envelope. So you vote your ballot, you then put it inside the certification envelope, you print your name, your home address, and your signature. And here's where the vote by mail process mirrors the voting at the polls. When you walk into the polls on election day and the poll worker turns to your page with your name and address and your signature, your registered signature, you have to sign next to your registered signature to match your registered signature. And your poll worker is supposed to verify that the signature matches. Just like here, you're signing your certification envelope, putting your ballot inside the certification envelope, sealing it. It then goes inside the return envelope and gets sent back to the Board of Elections. When it arrives at the Board of Elections, the Board of Elections scans in on the back, scans in the barcode, which contains your name and address, and it automatically goes to a file that shows that your ballot was returned to the Board of Elections. Then what happens is it is opened now it's being opened, and they're verifying signatures. The Board of Elections members are verifying signatures that they match. If it is verified that it matches, what happens is, and here's the security measure and the privacy measure. This certification envelope, once it is approved and matches and is qualified, the certification perforation is torn off the ballot envelope, and it is separated from the ballot envelope. Then on election day, we don't have early voting, we have election day voting. You can only vote on election day, whether that's by mail or whether that's on the voting machine. What that means is your ballot does not count until election day. So at 6 a.m. when the polls open is when they are going to take this envelope with just the ballot inside, open it, and run it through the optical scan reader to read how your ballot voted. So, and then throughout the day, from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., 14 hours during the day, the Board of Elections is opening up envelopes that no longer have identifiable information of the voter, putting it into the optical scanner and reading that ballot to count that ballot. So by 8 o'clock at night, every ballot that we have into the optical scanner, at 8 o'clock, we will be able to get the unofficial results as of 8 o'clock, and we'll be able to post those unofficial results at essexclerk.com. And there are unofficial results in every election because there are ballots allowed to come back in after Election Day. So as long as your ballot is postmarked Election Day, which is May 12th, or before, the Board of Elections, the state law allows for those ballots to come in up to 2 days after Election Day. So ballots are able to come in up to May 14th and can be counted as long as they're postmarked Election Day or prior. So that is the process. And I know there was a question about auditing and storage of ballots. Ballots need to be stored for up to 2 years, and they are stored under lock and key. And there is no auditing. There are challenges. So at this time, a candidate or a citizen can challenge an election based on what they feel to be unfair. But auditing is not in statute, although Senator Nia Gill put in a bill back in 2006 that calls for auditing, and it might just apply for a vote-by-mail election, where it would be a percentage, it would be mandatory auditing for a percentage of the vote. So that actually is being talked about right now, whether or not that bill that was passed in 2006 applies to this election and auditing this election.
When you say a percentage of the vote, Chris, you mean that if it's a particularly close election, up to a certain percent difference between the candidates, then it would automatically go to an audit of some sort?
My understanding is both. There would be both a sampling if the election was within a certain percentage, and then there would be an automatic audit no matter what the results were.
So the voting that we've talked about so far, Chris, has been about the municipal elections on May 12th that are 100% vote by mail for everyone. We don't know yet whether the July 7th primary and the November general election are going to be all vote by mail or not. If the polls are going to be open on those days, but someone still wants to do vote by mail, they won't automatically get that ballot. What do they need to do to sign up to be vote by mail voters this year?
Yes, well, if it is decided that this is going to be a regular election, then voters who do not want to go to the polls on July 7th need to apply for a vote by mail ballot. So there's a vote by mail application that it's at essexclerk.com or at the New Jersey Division of Elections website. And we are getting quite a few applications each day. I think just based on the chance of it being a regular election and not being an all vote by mail election, people want to be prepared that their application is in for that election.
So what is the deadline for requesting an absentee ballot?
Okay, so the deadline for the July 7th election, if it's a regular election, if it's not an all vote by mail election, it's a regular election where there's polling sites, then the deadline to vote by mail, which means that we would send them a ballot in the mail, would be June 30th, 7 days prior to Election Day.
And that's when they would have to have received a written request, where your office would have to have received a written request for a mail-in ballot. They'd have to have received it by then.
That's correct. And what's interesting also is that when the governor signed the executive order and moved the election to July 7th, two dates did not get moved, and that was the filing deadline for candidates, and then the change of party declaration. In New Jersey, if you're a registered Democrat, you can only vote in the Democratic Party. You have to choose which election you want to vote in, but you can't switch parties in the primary once you are a registered member of a party within 55 days. So that deadline has passed because the executive order came after that already had happened, and they just moved the dates from July 7th backwards, excluding the filing deadline and the change of party deadline.
Okay. So people will receive the ballot, the primary ballot that matches their registration as it currently stands.
Correct.
Okay. So if people want to sign up to be vote by mail voters ongoing, they can mail it into you. Can they also hand deliver it to the county clerk's office?
Yes, they can hand deliver it. They can mail it in. Something, Leslie, you brought up earlier, which is very important about signatures and signatures matching. We know a lot of people who register to vote, when they're 18, and then they're 40 years old, and their signature has changed. And we're still matching the registered signature to now an updated signature that they may have. They need to update that signature with voter registration. So on the voter registration form, that is now an all-inclusive form. So the voter registration not only includes new registrations, but it's change of name, change of address, change of party, change of signature. So they can update their signature on a voter registration form to match the signature that they now use. So that's very important, especially with people who might be disabled and now sign with an X. They need to update their signature for the system, the registration system, to an X to match how they currently sign.
That makes sense. Thank you. Thank you. So looking at all these 2020 elections coming up, for people who register to vote by mail, what happens if I'm registered to vote by mail? What happens if I don't get a ballot? I've heard about apartment buildings where mail carriers may be leaving ballots in bulk in a lobby rather than distributing them to individual mailboxes. I know things in my house have a tendency to go astray and get lost. If I lose a ballot, or if I spill coffee on it, or if I mess it up while I'm filling it out, what do I need to do?
Okay, well, I must say that our ballots are first-class mail. Return service requested is paid on those ballots. Plus, just to remind you that the return ballot, there's postage paid coming back to the Board of Elections. But yes, the postal worker is supposed to deliver each piece of mail to the individual mailbox, the residence's mailbox. And there has been reports of, ballots being, not delivered specifically to each individual mailbox, and that needs to be fixed. That needs to be remedied, and we are in contact with our federal representatives to make sure that there's follow through on the importance of these ballots and making sure that they get to the voter. And if the voter does not receive the ballot, they need to go to essexclerk.com, download the second ballot request form, email it to us. The email is on that second ballot request form, and we will priority mail them a ballot.
Very good. And they can also request a replacement in person if they go to the office as well?
Yeah, that's correct. So we are going to be open to accept any walk-ins of people who need to request a second ballot. They'll fill out the second ballot request form in person. We will hand them another ballot. They will vote on that ballot, and they will go 2 flights up and hand that ballot in to be counted to the Board of Elections.
Wonderful. If they're ready to vote on the day that they come to request
Right,
it.
and we're open Saturday. We're open this Saturday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Mhm.
If that helps, it's free and secure parking at the Hall of Records.
Very good. Now, is that something that people can do in person, come and request that ballot, even on election day?
Yes. There are no polling places, which is very unique. There are no provisional ballots. We are the polling location, the county clerk's office. So on election day from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., we'll be open for people who haven't received their ballot and want to get a second ballot, and it's too late to mail to them, so they can come in person and request a second ballot and vote on it right there and hand it in.
Fantastic. So, are there any concerns because of COVID-19 about the mail process being slower? I know that ballots need to be postmarked on election day and received within 2 days. Is there any concern that the mail system may not be able to handle that 2-day window as they normally would?
Right, and that's true. And Leslie, we spoke about that earlier. How the people need to send in their ballots as soon as possible, because a lot of the ballots are being quarantined where they're holding them for a day or so and not touching them. And then even when they come to the Board of Elections, they're quarantining them to make sure that if the virus is on the paper, that it dies. And so we need to make sure that people get their ballots in the mail or hand them in person as soon as possible to be counted. Because if it comes in May 15th, even though it's postmarked on May 12th or prior, it's not going to count. And I'll tell you, I would hope that if that happens, that someone takes it to court and forces those ballots to be counted.
I think there may actually have been something that just came through that the Washington state, the Wisconsin ballots may have been ruled acceptable even if they came in later, but I think that just came out maybe today, maybe yesterday. I'm not sure the details yet, but it will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Absolutely.
So there are so many things that as a society we entrust to the mail. We entrust all of our banking records and our tax payments, our tax bills. But I know there are people who are concerned about their votes being handled through the mail, and they're worried about security for that. What should they know about the security of the process of their ballots being transmitted through the mail, and how secure they are?
So what I was saying is that I often say that we have sworn, elected officials and sworn employees of the county, and there are sworn federal officers of the post office, and then the Board of Elections are sworn to uphold the laws and ballot security. And so, I know it's sometimes difficult for people to trust the process, but everyone is doing their utmost best to make sure that the process is followed and there's professionalism behind it and honesty. And I feel that the process is being run, could be run better, because we do need the mail system at full capacity. But as far as any issues with fraud, I don't think so. I don't think there's anything as far as fraud with vote by mail. I think it all has to do with making sure sworn officers are completing their jobs.
Mm-hmm. So when I mail my ballot back in, how can I know that my ballot was received? What would I do if I wanted to confirm that?
Okay, so there's two ways to do that. So we have the New Jersey Division of Elections website, where you can sign in as a voter, and you need to know, the tough part is you need to know your voter ID number to sign in to track your ballot. The other way is the county clerk's office and the Board of Elections each have that information on a file that we could produce to any voter who requests it. So we, on a daily basis, produce that file of all of the ballots that have been received by the Board of Elections. And we email that file. The list is quite large of people that we email that file to on a daily basis, so that they can follow and track and see who hasn't, whose ballot hasn't been received by the Board of Elections, and they can try and recruit that person to vote on that ballot or send that ballot back.
Because that's public information, whether someone has or has not voted. Not the content of their vote, but whether they have voted or not.
Right. The content is not public, but the whether or not they voted is public. It's public before the election as they return their ballot, and it's public after their voter history is public.
Very good.
As far as when they voted and how they voted, if it's by mail or on the machine.
Thank you. So we've talked about, you've talked about taking your ballot to the Board of Elections office to hand deliver it. That can happen at any time. Once you've gotten your ballot, you're free to do it any day through Election Day?
Yes, up until 8 o'clock Election Day. And that's another very important point, that any voter can bring their ballot back and deliver it back in person to the Board of Elections. But also another option is a voter can have another Essex County registered voter bring their ballot back to the Board of Elections for them. But they have to make sure the person who is going to do that for the voter, on the outside of the return envelope, there is a portion that is for the bearer to sign. So it's the name and signature and address of the bearer, which needs to be filled out before this ballot is brought back to the Board of Elections, because they want to know the chain of custody for this ballot, where this ballot had been. So they want to make sure that the bearer signs before they go to the Board of Elections. They hand it in and they sign the book. There's a book, a bearer book, that they must sign. If they do not sign that before they walk into the Board of Elections, the vote does not count. So that's a tragic way to be disenfranchised, just because of that simple bearer portion not being filled out and the chain of custody is broken.
So can anyone serve as a bearer? Are there any restrictions on who can serve that function?
A bearer has to be a registered voter of Essex County. That's the only requirement.
And so I presume they need to bring identification with them and present that identification when they're delivering it?
Correct. Yeah, they have to prove with an ID that they are a Essex County registered voter. And then they're looked up in the system.
Perfect. And do I understand right that that a bearer can deliver ballots
Another
when they
great
come
point.
in?
That's it. Yep, state statute a couple years ago that it was unlimited. It was unlimited as far as the number of bearers ballots that you could bring back. And then it was 10, and now it was changed to 3, and that includes your own. So if you bring your own back, then you only have 2 left to bring back. So it's 3 per voter per election.
It's per election, not just per an individual day. You can't drop off 3 one day and come back the next day with another 3.
No, it's per election.
Okay. Okay. So I think that addresses some of the charges that get levied against vote by mail, that there's a danger of vote harvesting, which is this new catchphrase, this idea that people are going to be scooping up votes and doing something nefarious with them, because any person can only deliver 2 votes other than their own.
Correct.
That's reassuring. Thank you. So can you talk a little more about what happens once the ballot in its envelope and with the flap with your signature comes to the Board of Elections? How is it safeguarded? What's the system of, who are the observers, and how do they supervise and oversee this process?
Okay, so all the observers are sworn, and it's administered by the Board of Elections. The Board of Elections has 4 members, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. The Board of Elections, and then there's the employees of the Board of Elections and the clerk to the Board of Elections. And what happens is each ballot that comes back, the registered signature of that voter is blown up on a piece of paper, and it is matched to the signature that the voter placed on their certificate envelope. So if there's any question, then it is voted on by the 4 members of the Board of Elections. There's 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and they vote as to whether or not that ballot should be admitted or not. And there could be challenges. So people from the public can view the process. They're gonna, in a normal situation, they can view in person. In this situation, they're live streaming the process to the Sheila Oliver conference room, where candidates, citizens can view the process and challenge ballots. So, give an example of a challenge. Maybe a candidate sees the ballots that have been received. They see the file of all the ballots that have been received by the Board of Elections, and they feel that they see a name and they feel that that person has moved from their municipality. And they might issue a challenge to that ballot. And then that goes to the 4 commissioners to rule on whether or not that ballot should be counted or not. So that's the process. And the privacy of the ballot is when it is approved by the board members that the certificate envelope, the flap, is detached from the enclosed ballot and separated, so that on election day, you just have envelopes that are sealed with the ballot inside and no identifiers of the voter. And then they're opened up and they're counted throughout the day.
And the anonymity of the vote is preserved.
Yes.
So if say the Board of Elections, if my ballot is challenged and it's rejected, would I even know? And is there any recourse if that happens?
Okay, so yes, so there is a list after the election that is made by the Board of Elections, the people that had their ballots rejected and the reasons why. If you are engaged in the process and know at the time that your ballot has been rejected, you can put in a challenge to say that your vote should count, but the final decision is with the Board of Elections. And then after certification, what happens is the Board of Elections rules on every challenge, and then all the votes are counted, and then I certify the results, and then any citizen or any candidate can challenge those results. They can challenge any ballot that has not been counted. They can, people voting, whatever challenge. So once the election is certified, a citizen or candidate has 15 days in which to challenge that election.
So how long is it reasonable to expect for election results to be finally done? Not the preliminary ones that you post up on election night or the day after. How long till the final count is certified?
Well, I'm shooting for May 18th. So election day is May 12th. The last ballots that can come in through the mail are by 8 o'clock, May 14th. Any extra counting of ballots or challenges still to be heard could be heard on May 15th, Friday. And I would like to certify results by that Monday, maybe even the Friday afternoon, but most likely Monday, May 18th. And what's interesting about that is the Newark School Board, the Irvington School Board, and the Nutley commissioner election, they would like to have their reorganization meeting and swearing ins on May 19th. So it kind of puts us on a timetable that we must meet.
Mm-hmm. So I have a few questions about voters who may have special circumstances that might make voting by mail more difficult. And normal circumstances, we'd assume that then they might choose to vote at the polls rather than vote by mail. But given that there's a possibility that that the July and November elections might be all vote by mail, I'd love to address them. For example, with vote by mail, we've talked a little bit about provisions that are made for voters with disabilities. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, on what could be done for a voter who might struggle either to obtain a ballot or to work with the ballot once it arrives or submit it?
Okay, so I mentioned earlier that there's two ways for a disabled voter to vote. One is by email, and there's a website set up by Democracy Live, which allows a disabled voter to utilize that website and vote online. As I mentioned, the difficult part about that is that although you can do it from home or remotely, you are giving up your privacy rights to your vote. But you could also choose to vote in person on a voting machine on election day, just as we do now. At the Hall of Records, that's the one difference. It's not at your polling site, or it's not at your city hall or town hall. It's now for this election at the Hall of Records. And the voting machine is capable of, audio, reading the ballot to a voter, and actually using a keypad to make your selections. So that's going to be available from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on election day for disabled voters.
Great, thank you, Chris. Now, what about college students? They might not be living at home. Their college addresses change from year to year. They might change between July and November. We don't even know if colleges are going to be open for in-person instruction this year. Is there anything special that they should do to make sure that that they receive their mail-in ballot?
Right, and that's another complication with this vote by mail election, is that the program from the state was set up to send anyone who was already on the forever vote by mail file, send their ballot to the requested residence where they wanted their ballot to be sent. So for instance, if a college student last October signed up for vote by mail forever and utilized their mailing address as their college residence, that's where their ballot was sent for this May 12th election. So they would automatically have to apply for a second ballot because their ballot went to their college, or if someone was somewhere else on vacation, and they need to update that on their vote by mail application. So they need, because on the application it says what is your registered address and where do you want your ballot sent. So they would need to update where they want their ballots sent. And a lot of them probably need to do that for this July 7th primary, because obviously, no one's going to be in college July 7th.
Right. And is the deadline for them, again, 7 days before the election, that they would need to have that in your hands?
Correct. Yeah, June 30th. By law, we are not able to mail ballots past June 30th. And that law was put in just for the fact of, those ballots not being able to reach that voter, and for that ballot to come back to be counted. The legislature felt 7 days was enough time, and any time inside of that wasn't enough time.
Very good.
To mail.
Okay, thank you. Now this is a difficult question. What if a voter experiences pressure or coercion from someone in their household, from a partner or a parent or a child, to vote a certain way? They won't have the protection of the privacy of a polling booth. Is there anything you would suggest for people in that situation in dealing with vote by mail if we have an all vote by mail election and they don't have an option?
Right. I understand what you're saying, because one outlet would be the superintendent of elections in Essex County, who is in charge of administering the polling places. And it's a very interesting question because your polling place becomes your kitchen table or your dining room table or wherever you decide to vote your ballot. So to have not only your privacy but your security is very important. And the outlets would be the Attorney General's office, the Superintendent of Elections, the Division of Secretary of State, Division of Elections, to call them and let them know that you feel threatened for how you should vote.
Thank you. I have a couple questions about simple address snafus. What do I do if a ballot arrives at my house that doesn't belong to anybody at my house? What's my best course of action?
Yes, very good question. And what the person should do is return to sender. They should write on it, not at this address, return to sender, give it back to the postal carrier to send back to the county. And also that's very important because I've heard some concerns from people that the voter rolls reflect more people than the census or the real count of the town. For instance, someone brought up that Montclair has almost 32,000 voters on the rolls, and they think that Montclair really has maybe 26,000 residents. And this is how that happens. This is state statute, how a person is removed from the voter rolls. A person can only be removed from the voter rolls a few ways. Number one, they register to vote in some other location and they include their previous address. So for instance, if they live in Montclair and they move to Belmar, New Jersey, and they write on their voter registration, I was previously registered in Montclair and I now want to register in Belmar, Monmouth County sends Essex County that copy of the voter registration to remove them from the voter rolls from Essex County. The other way is if someone passes away, if someone's deceased, then Social Security or the municipal clerk notifies the county voter registration and says, this person is deceased, take them off the voter rolls. Sometimes that doesn't happen. It doesn't cross. So then the third way that a voter comes off the voter rolls is if a sample ballot or a ballot is sent to a voter and that sample ballot or ballot is returned to sender as non-deliverable, undeliverable, that voter then gets placed into the system as an inactive voter. They become inactive. And what that means is if then they miss 2 federal elections, so for the next 2 years, for instance, if they miss this 2020 general election, and then they miss every election for the following 2 years and miss the 2022 federal congressional election, they are then removed from the voter rolls. But just because the sample ballot or the voting ballot is sent back as undeliverable, the voter registration cannot automatically remove them because it might have been a mistake. It might have been returned back to the county's mistake. And what happens is, I'll give you an example of, let's say Montclair, a household of 5, a couple with 3 children, and 3 children move out of the house, but their sample ballots keep coming to the house, and the couple keeps throwing out the sample ballots and not returning them back. Those 3 children will remain on the voter rolls forever because you don't have to vote to stay on the voter rolls. But if your sample ballot or your ballot comes back that makes you inactive and then you miss 2 federal elections, that's how you're removed. So there's a lot of children in Montclair that have moved out and the household is still accepting those sample ballots and throwing them out.
So does that mean that those households are also receiving actual ballots, even though those grown children have left? So they'll receive actual ballots. What's to prevent them coming in, being used, even though those people don't live in that
signature match? So either signature match or a challenge. So It could be, so obviously the signature would have to match, just like someone who walks into the polling site on election day.
Mhm.
They have to match the signature that's registered in the poll book. And if they can't match that, the board worker is supposed to challenge them and say, this isn't you. Just the same way with this certificate envelope going back to the Board of Elections, it's a signature match to verify, if the person is the same person.
Right. Well, again, thinking about the comparison between voting by mail and voting at the polls, um, and thinking about election day itself, what do you do if you have intentionally registered to vote by mail? It's not 100% vote by mail election, the polling places are open, but election day comes and you realize you haven't mailed back your vote by mail ballot, or you decide that you really want to vote in person, or you forgot, you can't hand deliver it for some reason. Are you out of luck, or can you still go to your polling place and have your vote counted?
No, in this election,
Well, not
May
in the May
12th?
12th election, but in
Oh.
future elections, if polling places are open, but you've registered to vote by mail and you decide that you want to or need to vote at the polling place, you haven't sent in your ballot, or you can't find it, or you just prefer to use the polls. Do you have options, or are you stuck?
It's another great question. So once you apply for a vote by mail ballot, you are not eligible to vote on the voting machine, but you are eligible to vote on a provisional ballot. So once you apply for a vote by mail ballot, your poll book page will be stamped vote by mail voter. And if by any chance you threw out your ballot or you misplaced it, you spoiled it, you didn't vote on it, you can go to the polls on election day and your page will be stamped vote by mail voter. You can request, or they will offer a provisional ballot. You vote on a provisional ballot, and that provisional ballot will go back to the county. The county will verify that you did not, in fact, vote by mail, because they wait 3 days to check everything and make sure you did not vote by mail, and then the provisional ballot is counted.
But you can't bring your mail-in ballot to your polling place and hand it to the poll workers. Is that correct?
No, you cannot. Yeah, you cannot. The only way to get your vote by mail ballot back in is to go to the post office and have it postmarked on election day and sent back to the county, or your mailbox, as long as they're picking it up at 5 o'clock that day and postmarking it, or delivering it in person to the Board of Elections, or have a messenger, a bearer, bring it back for you
Great.
by 8 o'clock election night.
Very good. So looking to the future, does registering to vote by mail this year for the July or November elections, does that mean that we'll be automatically signed up to vote by mail in future elections going forward?
Okay, so this election, the May 12th, if you did not request a vote by mail ballot, which we know a majority of people did not, just the people who were already on the file would have requested or would have been sent a ballot. Those people who never requested a ballot will not be on the vote by mail file in the future. They'll just go back to the way they were already in the system as a voter who has a choice to vote by mail or go to the polls and vote. And like I said, someone who wants to come off that file needs to send us an email, send us a letter saying that they want to come off that file. But there's two ways. I think I mentioned this earlier. If you want to apply for a vote by mail ballot, there's two options. You can just apply for just that single election that you're looking to vote in, or you can apply for a future all mail-in ballot file to receive ballots for every election.
That's terrific, Chris. Thank you. We have some questions that have come in from listeners. If we've got time to do that.
Sure.
Great.
Yes.
Well, one listener says that a relative received a letter saying that as an unaffiliated voter in Essex County, they can vote in the primary. Is that correct? This listener thought that you can only vote in the primary if you declare a party at the door. And if so, how does that function? function in a vote by mail scenario?
Okay, so in New Jersey, we have a closed primary, which means that in order to vote in the Democratic primary, you have to be a Democrat. And to vote in a Republican primary, you have to be a Republican. But as an unaffiliated voter, on election day, you have the choice. And you're asked by the poll worker, because it says unaffiliated with your name, you can choose to either vote in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, but you become a member of that party at the time you sign the book. So you then become, so you are, if you choose the Democratic primary to vote in, once you sign the poll book, you are a registered Democrat. If you choose to vote in the Republican primary, once you sign the poll book, you become a registered Republican. So I just had someone, a friend who went to DMV and mistakenly checked the box for the Constitution Party. And they no longer can vote in the primary, this primary. They can vote next year's primary, but it's too late for them to change out of the Constitution Party, which they mistakenly did, because that deadline has passed to change parties.
So how does that play out with a ballot that comes to you in the mail at your home? If you're an unaffiliated voter, you're not going to a polling place to register as one party or another on election day. What happens if, do you receive a ballot or do you not receive a ballot that is party specific for the primaries?
That's a great question. And what happens with unaffiliated voters, and there's a lot of unaffiliated voters on the vote by mail forever file, because those unaffiliated voters vote in the general election and request vote by mails in the general, so they're automatically part of the primary. And what we do is we send them both ballots. So an unaffiliated voter receives both a Democratic ballot and a Republican ballot, and they choose which one they'd like to vote on or not choose. They don't have to vote. But if they choose the Republican ballot, they vote on the Republican ballot and send that ballot back. Their vote counts, they become a Republican. If they do the Democratic ballot, they become a Democrat and their vote counts. If they do both ballots, neither count. So they have to choose one, just like they would choose at the polling site.
Very good, thank you. We have a question that came in. Do you have any statistics about the prevalence of overvoting in mail-in ballots? Is that something that gets tracked? Is that something that's a significant concern?
It happens. What happens more is there's undervoting. That happens more based on a couple of reasons. I mean, one being that maybe someone doesn't know all of the candidates and they have 3 choices and they vote for one or they vote for 2 just based on their knowledge of the candidates, or they just choose to vote, limit their votes. The overvotes, it's not significant, but it definitely happens. And I don't know the exact percentage, but it does happen.
That if, say, you're allowed to choose 3 candidates out of a list of 8, and instead you mark off that you're voting for 4 of them.
And your vote is nullified.
Okay.
Yes.
If you do that for a particular slate on the ballot, does that nullify your entire ballot or only votes for that specific office?
Another great question. It nullifies only that office vote. It does not. The optical scanner reads the correct votes for other offices. It only nullifies the office you overvoted for.
Great. One question came in. Given the problems the post office is having, what, if anything, can be done about the mail delivery delays? She reported that some mail has taken 2 weeks to get delivered just from one address in town to another address in the same town. 2 weeks is a scary lag if we're talking about waiting for ballots to come or waiting for ballots to get delivered. What would you advise? And is there anything that we can do on a district level, on a county level, on a township level to help with the situation?
Well, I would say that the post office is a federal office. So it's the federal government that we need to be in contact with. We do have great relationships with the Postmaster General and with the local post offices on a county level, but they're still a federal office. So it still comes from the federal representatives as far as making sure the post office is working at full capacity and delivering at 100%.
Right. We had a question about overseas voting and if there's any change to how overseas voting works in, say, 100% vote by mail election or any of these coming up with the changes due to COVID-19. Does that affect overseas voters at all, or is it situation normal for them?
So it's normal for them. Overseas voters vote by email. And as I brought up about disabled voters voting by email, it's the same thing where it could be someone who's living overseas or could be someone who's in the military overseas. They're giving up their privacy rights and they're signing an affirmation that gives up their privacy rights to their vote. But we in Essex County have a lot. We have more than 2,000 overseas email voting federal voters. And their ballots, we only count the federal offices. They don't get to vote for local offices, like for state, for county, for municipal offices. Their votes only count for federal offices. But we're looking at, by this general, an increase to probably 3,000, which you compare it to other counties, it's quite a bit more as far as federal votes.
Well, we're a worldly bunch around here.
Yeah.
We've gotten questions about write-in candidates. If there's a write-in candidate who's not listed on the ballot, how does the Board of Elections identify the individual who's gotten that vote? And are vote tallies for write-in candidates going to be publicly listed somewhere?
Yes, so that's another thing that the Board of Elections counts. They count the write-in votes. Each ballot that goes through an optical scanner identifies a write-in vote, and then they are manually counted. And those are certified. Those results are certified. And, we have, after a general election, usually we produce a book that some people like to look at where they see all the write-ins, and you just don't see serious write-ins, comedic write-ins, but yeah, it's available to the public, all the write-ins. And you see it actually also on the results on the voting machine. You will see how many write-ins came, and on the strip of paper that comes out of the back of the voting machine, it types the names of who is written in on the voting machine. And with the paper, it's actually written in, obviously, by the voter, human mark.
Gritty question. We've touched upon this before. What if a voter can't remember precisely how they signed their registration, whether they used their middle initial or didn't? Is there a quick and easy way for them to find out that information so that they eliminate the risk of their ballot being rejected?
Yeah, well, that's the Commissioner of Registration. That's great. So they can call or email the Commissioner of Registration. The number is 973-621-5061. They can ask them if they would, email them or, send them their registered signature. Or they can update it on a voter registration form, check off update signature, and they would scan in their new signature.
Just start from scratch. Good.
Just start from scratch, or they can, like you said, find out how they're registered and try and match that, as opposed to their changed signature, which has been acquired along the way.
Right. So when do you expect the mail-in ballots to be arriving to voters for the July election and for the November election? When should people start expecting those?
Yes, so our mailing date is May 30th, which is 38 days before Election Day. So May 30th is our initial mailing to anyone who has applied for vote by mail up to that date. And if the election is an all vote by mail election, that's the date that all ballots will be mailed, May 30th.
Let me just see if there are any other questions that we can tackle here. So you've discussed the cross-referencing between different voter registration districts if you've moved, if you have unregistered yourself in one place or in another. Can you talk a little bit more about how this different districts cross-reference to make sure that people aren't voting where they shouldn't be? Does it all come down to the signatures matching?
Yeah, well, their registration is apparent too. So, but it's mainly that the signature matches the registered signature. That is what is verified, or that voter has been challenged by a citizen or by a campaign, that it needs to be looked into further. And both instances, the 4 members of the Board of Elections, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, decide on any question that arises as far as legitimacy of a ballot.
We had one listener who had the impression that if your ballot is rejected and you want to challenge it, the rejection of your ballot, that you have to know precisely when the rejection happened. Is that correct?
What do you mean to know precisely when?
I'll read you the question verbatim because I'm not sure I understand. This is new to me. Did Chris say that a person has to know the time, as in the hour and minute, that a voter's ballot is rejected before he or she can challenge that rejection? I'm not sure if it would cross
wires. Not at all. So what happens is the process is ongoing. I know that they're going to be verifying signatures and answering challenges on Saturday all day. What happens is after the certification, any ballot that was not counted for any reason, there will be a reason listed for why they determine it shouldn't count, and then that voter or a campaign can challenge the Board of Elections on their determination. They can say that we think you were wrong for that, and here's why. So they can make their case, but it's only after certification that process comes into play. You can't you can't challenge the board's decision once they've made their decision. The challenge comes after the results have been certified.
I have one
They make their ruling based on the information they have with the 4 commissioners, and that ruling is final until certification, and then a voter or campaign can challenge that ruling of the board.
Thank you. I have one last question. One thing that I understand voters have to take into consideration when they're using a mail-in ballot is that if they're sending their ballot in before the last day of campaigning, things may show up in the news. There might be new positions to consider, big bombshells, whatever. Do you have any suggestions for voters on how to make that decision about how long do they hold onto their ballot before they put it in the mail? What should an individual voter factor in when they're making that personal decision about how to time their mail back?
Okay, and I have an interesting story concerning this. The states that, now that we know there's 5 states that vote all by mail, and then a lot of states, most states are highly vote by mail states, high percentages. So those campaigns begin earlier and they happen earlier because they know those votes are going to come in a lot earlier than the official election day. So whether that be putting out where they stand or opposition research. It all comes into play earlier than in New Jersey. An interesting story, in 2008, New Jersey's primary was moved up, presidential primary was moved up to February 5th, which means we had to send out ballots Christmas time for that February 5th primary because we wanted to be more of a player in national politics. We wanted to, get in the game earlier in presidential politics in the primary season. And what happened is we sent out our ballots Christmas time, and then people started voting, and 2 weeks later, everyone started dropping out of the race. So all of these candidates, there was big fields on the Democratic side, big fields on the Democratic side, and candidates are dropping out, and people started complaining, saying, I want my vote again because I voted for a candidate who's no longer a candidate. And they had a great argument because in New Jersey, we don't have early voting. We have election day voting. Your vote only counts on election day, whether that's on the voting machine or whether they count the vote on election day by mail. They don't count it beforehand. So I decided to allow people to vote again. What I said was you had to come in and vote another ballot with the updated ballot, and we would nullify the ballot that you had already sent in.
Mm-hmm.
And then the state legislature said that, passed a law saying you could only vote one time. There's none of that anymore. And so that was changed. But if it happens where New Jersey becomes more of a vote by mail state, the campaigns will have to adjust to that and ramp up campaigning, and the news stories on those candidates will have to be more thorough earlier on.
Thank you so much, Chris. Everyone listening tonight, if you have questions later, you can reach out to Chris. Chris, do you have any final closing statements that you'd like to make about vote by mail, and anything that you would say to encourage people who might be considering it?
I encourage either equal mean of voting, either by mail or in person. One thing I would like to add is, our nation is 245 years old. At the inception of our nation, you had to be a white, male, Protestant landowner. And then with our Constitution, you no longer had to be a landowner or a Protestant. And then with fighting for 245 years, with the 15th Amendment, with the 19th Amendment, with the Civil Rights Act, there was a battle for voting rights. And it's important to know that the hardest fights are the ones that are the most important to fight for. And no matter your race, no matter your creed, your sex, or your political philosophy, you must vote to ensure the promise of America. So I just implore everyone to be a part of the community, to be civically engaged, to get in this game, because as a debt to being Americans. So Leslie, I want to thank you for inviting me to this forum. I hope it's been informational, and I'm just so happy to be a part of it.
Well, you've certainly made it easier for people to participate. I really appreciate your taking this time. If people have questions who are Essex County folks, they can reach out. I think you've said either to their municipal clerks or to you. People who are Passaic or Morris County or Sussex County can reach out to their county clerks as well. So thank you very much for joining us and for consistently providing such excellent support to voters here in Essex County. I'd like to also thank Pat Simon, who helped coordinate the tech end of this presentation. I would be sitting here staring at a blank screen without his backup here. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. Feel free to share the webcast with your friends, your families, with your neighbors. We really want to make sure that people know as much as they can about this changing landscape of our elections. We don't know what the next several upcoming elections are going to bring as far as the process goes. It's a lot to take in. So we'll be providing providing this video shortly on our YouTube channel for NJ 11th for Change. And you can also find a link to it soon on our website, which is, www.nj11thforchange.org. And so much of this information is important, not just for the May 12th municipal elections in that smattering of Essex County towns, but also for our primaries in July and our November general election. So thanks to everyone, and get out and vote. So long, everyone, and thank you.